of Ask an Expert. I am so excited for this episode. We are joined here by Dr. Sylvia Houston. I'm inclined to say Houston because I live in New York, and that is just what we call it here. But Dr. Sylvia Houston, and Sylvia, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to jump into the topic here, but before we do, just thank you so much for taking the time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. Well, we got introduced to Sylvia via the wonderful Lauren Spreiser. So I am so excited to learn from you this evening and hear about yoga for equestrians, life coaching for equestrians, all these things that I should be doing more of, taking advantage of. But before we dive right in, I know you had mentioned before we go live that you would lead us through a bit of an exercise. So let's start with that. I'm just going to give you the floor.
Well, thank you very much. So usually how I start any session, and whether it is my yoga, of course, or whether even before going into the barn, I like to take a little time to go inside. And so my invitation to all of you right now is just to close your eyes if you're so inclined and take a couple of breaths. And notice whether that's even easy for you to do, or whether you are feeling so pulled in different directions or overstimulated that going inside is a little bit of a challenge. Notice whether your breath goes down to the belly or if it's up a little bit higher. And then encourage it to release down into the belly. I invite you to soften your face and your jaw, to allow any tension within your shoulders to just melt away, in particular during your exhale. The exhale is what soothes our nervous system. And then take a moment to notice where your attention has been drawn throughout the day. Is where our attention goes, our energy goes. And then acknowledging that, bring yourselves back to the sensation of sitting or standing or driving, whatever it is that you're doing as you're listening to this. So that you can be fully present. Our bodies often will, quote unquote, cross the threshold into another room or into what we're doing, but our minds tend to get stuck in other places, sort of time travel. And so bringing ourselves back into presence right now. When you're ready, feel free to open your eyes.
Wonderful.
You hear my dog in the background, sorry.
It's always perfect timing. That was, I mean, I needed that. I know that much. So
how did that make you feel?
Honestly, I need a lot more of that. But it was it challenging?
Yeah, was it a challenge to sort of go in, or was it like, oh, what a relief?
It was challenging initially, and then I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna lean in.
Nice.
But yes, I think my co-founder and sister Jessa, she does a lot more like meditation and that kind of stuff. So that stuff comes more naturally to her for sure.
Mm-hmm. 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 I can understand.
Well, now that I am ready, I feel much more relaxed. Thank you for that. And I hope anybody who participated or is listening followed along with that, because I think we can all feel a little bit better. So, Sylvia, as now that we all are feeling very zen, do you mind just starting with giving us your background and kind of giving us a bit more, like, set the table for who you are and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Sure. That would be a very long story, so I'll try the nutshell version here that is most relevant to what we're doing. Because there's a everything that happens in our lives really kind of brings us into this point. And most of all, I was the horse crazy little girl from a non-horse crazy family who always just, I would see the tail of a horse somewhere and I'd get very excited about it. As if, ever since my first memory was like riding a pony, not being like not getting off. Um, and I also, relevant to this, have been practicing and teaching yoga for over 25 years. In fact, I got my start in New York City. So that's where I started. I trained there with various teachers, but then also in India. And I started when I was in graduate school at Columbia University with the yoga practice. I continued to be drawn to yoga, even though my career was in conservation biology. That was what I got my PhD in. And then I went on to have a full career in that as a professor and administrator for various master's degree programs. But the yoga always pulled me back. And of course, the horses. I didn't always have the opportunity to ride horses or be with them, but I would take it anytime I did. So these two streams were there, and I felt that there was an obvious connection. And then about 10 years ago, I also became a life coach because the work of yoga is about not only the physical asanas, but the mindfulness. And the mindfulness is about getting to know oneself. And coaching is all about getting to know oneself. So all of these streams came together into what I do now, which is teach yoga to equestrians and also help them with life coaching.
That is so, so cool. I mean, your background, it, like, how you got to where you are today, it seems like you've gotten to exactly where you were meant to be, but it wasn't like you initially set out knowing this is
Yes.
where you were going to end up, which those are my favorite kind of stories, because I think everyone can relate to being like, I don't know what to do next. And I think a lot of people like you are really lucky when you find that thing that you're such a expert at, and you're just so meant to be there. So it's really, really cool that you found this kind of passion in life. Um, how for you do kind of how do you intersect your expertise in yoga and life coaching? Is there a lot of overlap in those kind of career paths or disciplines?
There is. So, as I mentioned, with yoga, when you get on the mat, it can absolutely just start with the physical. It certainly did for me. I started practicing Ashtanga Yoga, which is a very physical form of yoga, and you're there. There's a very set sequence. You do it every day. I'd be up at 5 in the morning doing my hour and a half of Ashtanga every single day, except for a full moon and a new moon. And that's the rule. And, it was it was pretty rigid, but I think I had to go through that to come to the understanding of this is not just about facing yourself on the mat. And so when you get on the mat, what often happens, we start with the physical, but we start to peel away layers of the emotional. And there are often times when students will finish a class and they'll sort of sheepishly come up to me afterwards and say, "Is it normal to cry in class?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's perfectly normal to cry in class. You just released your psoas." So there is, if you think about horses, a horse that's very tense up like this is going to probably not be very much able to listen to what the rider is asking. might bolt, might buck, might, do all sorts of things like this. If we can help the horse relax, release, loosen, oh yeah, now learning can happen. Now a conversation can happen. Now we can be present with each other. This is what happens with yoga. If somebody is constantly walking around tense, tight shoulders, hunched over, tight psoas, which is in our hips, and is actually a very important muscle for riding as well, and holds a lot of emotion because it's a muscle that's involved in fight and flight response, then that person is probably not going to be able to think very expansively, to learn, to be able to go inside and figure out what's going on with themselves as well. And to know oneself is really the best gift one can give to oneself and to others, because when you know yourself, you're able to be in this world as the best version of who you are. And so the coaching and the yoga intersect very deeply in that there are certain poses that help us let the body go and be much more receptive to the wisdom we already have inside. And coaching accesses that wisdom that we already have inside. It's not about me teaching you. It's not about me telling people what I think is the best way to go forward, but it's actually about the wisdom that I already have in.
Yeah, that's a good, it's a good kind of opportunity to ask, what, in your definition, what really is life coaching? Like when somebody signs up for that, like what can they expect?
Right.
And who's a good candidate?
Right. Yeah. Another good question. Because a lot of people get very confused about that. Like, what is, there's coaches for baseball, there's coaches for riding, right? Like you're a coach at the show. It's different from that. The coach's role is to help you discover things about your motivations. It is, again, going back to, it is a process of self-discovery. And coaching can take the form of, sometimes we can do questionnaires, formal questionnaires that help us figure out what are your strengths, what is the type of personality you have, all of those things. But I tend to not do a whole lot of that. Coaching is about discovery around specific issues that the person who is being coached wants to explore. And it is a going inside. Someone said very wisely, there is a little bit of a gray area with therapy, but it's not therapy. Someone said very wisely that therapy is recovery and coaching is discovery. And it's really about discovering what is at the root of the issue that we're exploring, and then also making a plan to move forward. But that expertise lies within the person being coached. The coach's role is simply to help them uncover that and to walk with them on that path, not as the expert.
So with recovery with therapy versus discovery with life coaching, if you're going to sign up for life coaching, is it kind of just like an anybody can benefit from this thing? Or do you want clients to come to you and be like, okay, I'm having a big issue with fear going into the show jumping arena?
Right. Yeah, no, it's usually that. Like somebody will come to life coaching when they're in some kind of transition stage, or if they have a specific issue like that, right? I am really want to go and do the show jumping. I think it's really kind of fun. It's very fun. The moment I step in, I freeze. I get terrified. What's that about? And so, yes, that would be a perfect candidate for coaching. So, yes, anybody can benefit because it's like, well, we're all going to come up with some issues somewhere along the line. But if you're really, it needs to also be somebody, though, who's willing to go inside and is willing to ask themselves the hard questions via the coach. Because if you're not willing to go in and be introspective about, well, what might be causing this fear, or you're not willing to trust in the process of releasing, through your body. This is where the somatic, what I do, I call it somatic life coaching, and somatic means with the body. So we really check in, like, where's that fear held? Is it held in your hips? Is it held in your heart? Where that might have come from? So there, those would be the people that would benefit from that. But it would also be somebody who is going through a transition. I can use myself as an example. When I was deciding to leave the professoriate academia, that was a big leap. And I was leaving prestige. I was leaving this very secure job. I had just bought a mare. And used my last savings to buy a really expensive new saddle. And because that was the only one that really fit well. And it was kind of like, well, I'm taking this huge leap. Am I going to do it? Am I not going to do it? This is a great person for coaching as well, because there's obviously this impetus, but then, okay, am I going to really, like, do I want to do this? Am I prepared? How am I prepared? Am I psychologically ready for this? Am I going to wait? Am I going to do something to prepare myself more? So those are the kinds of people that benefit.
So if you had a client come to you with that, they're facing that decision, kind of how do you coach them through that?
Okay, sure. So the arc of a coaching conversation is, the first part is pretty much what we did, which is quiet in. And for some people, that's going to feel really irritating. But those are the people who need it the most. It truly, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but you have to get quiet inside to be able to access those truths that are in there. And so then I would ask the client, after we've settled in, and perhaps he or she has a way of doing it for themselves, or maybe they don't want to. And that's fair. Right? That's my role is not to force them into getting quiet. My role is to be there as their thinking partner. I would ask them, what's bubbling up for you? What are some of the things that are coming up? And often it can be like lots of different things that come up. But the process of actually speaking them can sometimes help to clarify the answer to the question that I usually would pose next, which is, so what's important? And what's important about that to you? Then that can then pinpoint that particular issue for that session. Now, there may be all sorts of other things that we would need to unpack in other sessions that are relevant to that, but that specific issue, because a successful coaching session is one where we can identify what is the goal for this session. So the next question is, what would success look like by the end of our time together?
Yeah. Does for most of your clients, is that, like, for this client, for you being the client in this case, would success be making the decision? Like, is that a reasonable marker of success?
It depends on how much the client has done up to that point. I would not necessarily expect that within one session.
Yeah.
I would say, 3 to 5 sessions minimum to start with, just to start unpacking the layers. Coaching conversation can take anywhere from a half hour to an hour. And it's the coach's job to keep it focused on that particular micro goal within the larger picture. Perhaps the larger picture we've identified is, do I make this decision, right? Do I leave academia, as an example? But within that, there's going to be different things that might come up that need decision making along the way, that either decision making, so it could be problem solving, but usually it's not. Usually it's addressing the emotional of the decision.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that seems to apply just to, like, life in general. I think that is that would be a super, super helpful resource to have. So a typical coaching session, and we will get, I promise we'll talk about the yoga as well. I just want to, I cover a bit of the coaching, and then we'll hop over to the yoga. for a typical coaching session, kind of what is the usual structure of that? How does that work? Are the takeaways like exercises that the person should do after the fact, or kind of what can somebody kind of expect?
So, one thing that I will mention about the sessions is that they are absolutely confidential, and all coaches are bound by confidentiality agreement. There's actually an agreement that's signed with the client, and so as I mentioned, we would start with a grounding. We would start to figure out, well, what's bubbling up for you now? What's the focus? What would success look like at the end of this conversation? We then unpack whatever the issue is. And my role as a coach is actually also to notice any kind of changes in energy that the person is having, because you can really start to unpack a lot when you notice, oh, they got very animated about this, or they kind of shrunk in about this. And so I start to ask questions around that. And once we start to close the conversation, as we come to the conclusion where we've unpacked the issue, we've perhaps set a plan, and there may be a strategy. One strategy might be, I'm going to go and journal about this. Another strategy might be, I'm actually going to seek out somebody who's going to help me figure out my finances after I make the leap, right? That might be a problem to solve. So that might be the action plan. And then the coach's role is also to be there as someone who supports that action. So someone to whom the coachee is accountable. And the next time we meet, we check in. How'd that go? So that accountability piece is actually pretty important, because so many of us have great ideas and great plans, but if we are not accountable, not all of us are able to follow through.
Yeah. Yeah, I can completely relate to that. Even with running Red IQ, like we are very strict about setting weekly goals, because otherwise it's like 3 weeks will go by and it's like, what did we do? And it's like, oh
Yeah.
no, like we have to keep ourselves in line and make sure we're always moving the goalpost a little bit forward each week. So I love that. Okay, how do you integrate the principles of yoga with life coaching to kind of create this holistic approach to riding?
Yeah. So there's, depending on what we discover, oftentimes it will. Sometimes the segue is from the coaching. Salud. Sometimes the segue is from the yoga, and I mentioned once before, I mentioned the psoas. So let's go back to our example of somebody who wants to go into the show ring, but has a lot of fear. I would probably ask for permission to work with that person, because this is all about respecting also the coachee. So I'd say, would it be okay with you if we explored some hip release movements? In particular, because anxiety tends to reside in the hips. And it actually makes sense evolutionarily if you think about it. Because if you were a cave person faced with a saber-toothed tiger, you're not going to be sitting there exploring your inner life. You will be out of here. And those muscles in your hips had better be helping you along. You're also probably tense up like this, protect the vulnerable organs. So your trapezius is going to get tight, right? So you can imagine, and we can all picture, right? Your horses started bucking. All of a sudden we're like, in this curled up pose going, help. So that's a very, very normal and actually adaptable response for humans. But how do we undo that? And how do we start to release those muscles that tense up, and then we don't have any idea what to do with? So I would probably start exploring some movements like lunges, which help to, the hip flexors are the muscles that would, let's say if you're walking or if you're going to lift your knee up, they're going to lift the knee up. And they're right in the crease of the hip. And included in those are the psoas muscle that I've mentioned before. It attaches to the inside of your thigh, then goes deep in your pelvis, and actually attaches to your lower back. And it is a muscle that if it's really tight, it's going to cause lower back problems by pulling it into low doses or overarching. It will probably cause some hip pain. And then think about it as a rider. If you're a dressage rider, you need to have a long leg, but that leg is going to creep up if your psoas is particularly tight, or if you have fear issues. If you're a jumper, then that psoas has to remain very flexible, because as you're going over the jump, you are going to be opening and closing the angle of your hip quite a bit. And so if it's stiff and not very responsive, you're not going to be able to move smoothly with the horse over that jump. So I would start with that. But then as that starts to release, there might be some emotions that start to come up. And I know when I've done intense hip stuff, I'm just exhausted afterwards, because it's like, oh, okay, it's just, that was a lot. But once you learn to release those muscles, when you're actually in the saddle and you feel them tensing, you can become more self-aware and go, oh, that's what's happening. Let me just take a breath and let me see if I can let go. So much as sometimes I'll have students that will come to me, or clients that will come to me, and I'll say, please release your shoulder. And they're like, I don't know how. I'm like, okay, tense it more, release now. And so they learn how to release, because sometimes we don't even have those conversations with our bodies. And to learn how to have that kind of conversation with your body, and then to let go, and then to be able to apply it in the situation off the mat, is what I'm hoping to be able to bring to the client. And so if a coaching client has the fear issue, I would address the physical. I would also ask, what does it feel like? Where is it in your body when you get into the ring? What happens? Maybe go with them, because we are in proximity, and help them to build awareness and build the tools of awareness and relaxation and breath. That there's some really wonderful breath techniques that can be used, that you hone on the mat when it's not moving underneath you, and then you go and use when you're actually in the saddle. And so that's practice. I mean, it really is practice, because this is not something we can have all these ideas in our head, but to actually put it into practice is where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's, as you're talking, I'm like checking off the boxes of like, oh, I have that. Oh, I have that. It's like, I have hip tightness. I have lower back pain. I'm probably pretty stressed. It's like, oh, wow, this is all making a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we have some rider fitness content on Ride IQ, and one of our coaches, Coach Shando, his first session for his 10-part series was all about like using a foam roller. And everybody who did this 10-part series with us, like we were kind of all starting it together, and everyone was like, oh my God, when it got to like my IT band and my hips, it was so painful. Like I'm so tight. And it's like, yeah, we're all in this together. Like we can all totally relate to these like just general kind of points of tension that we've created via our lifestyle. So it's really, I love to hear that you're helping people address that. When someone comes to you and they're kind of like this prototype or like stereotypical, you've got some hip tightness, you probably have some lower back pain, where do you start with them? And what's kind of your recommendation for using yoga to address this?
Yeah. So if they're coming to me from the yoga perspective, it depends on what perspective they come to me from and with. If because, and I'll clarify that, if somebody says to me, I want to do yoga for riding, it may be a different approach than I want to do coaching for riding. And I say that because the person who comes to me with coaching, from the coaching perspective or from the coaching angle, is already wanting to explore more than the physical. The person who comes to me from yoga, in the West, it is a physical practice for most, even though the magic of the poses happens whether you want to or not, and it takes you into a deeper realm. But then I would start with some hip poses. Well, I would actually do an evaluation. It would depend on, and I would ask, well, what are your goals? I always have conversations with people who start with me, whether it's somebody who wants to join my online sessions or somebody who wants to, which are group sessions, or somebody who wants to do privates online or in person with me. I always have an initial conversation with them because I want to know what is really underneath this, and what's your overall goal. And I start there. I meet the person where they are, and my goal is not for them to be hooked on me forever. And perhaps they'll keep practicing with me for a really long time, for years, as some of my students have over the decade, because they enjoy it. They enjoy the camaraderie. They enjoy the community. They're still learning new things. I keep learning new things, and I bring them back to my classes. But I want students and clients to be empowered. I want them to have their own yoga toolkit or their own coaching toolkit, in this sense. So with the prototype that you mentioned of the tight back or painful back, tight hips, I would probably do some hip asanas, which are poses, start to explore those, start to explore how that feels. The whole body is always involved, so it wouldn't be the only thing. I would probably leave the student with some work because it's not a one and done kind of thing. It would probably have to be a regular session with yoga. Twice a week is good. Once a week you can get by if you're good about doing homework. But it is just that exploration and that consistency. It's that would start to unwind, because it's what we do is going to continually tighten things up. If we don't change the patterns that we have, or we don't change the way that we do things, we're not going to be able to undo the tightness in the lower back, or to undo the tightness in the hips. But the physical poses will start to bring the relief, and then maybe we can start to hold our body in a different posture. Maybe we can start to move in with healthier biomechanics. Maybe we can start to improve the range of motion, which then is also going to change things. And here it relates to horses. If you think about how when we can help our horses release in certain places, all of a sudden their movement is different. And now they stop certain compensations. And now they start to build muscle in different places, hopefully in the right places. And now we can start to level up our work. So it's pretty much the same thing. And one of the things I teach at Chi University, which is not far from us here, which is the premier traditional Chinese veterinary medicine and spinal manipulation, which is chiropractic, but they're not allowed to call that, for small animals as well as for equines. And I teach in the class for both equine veterinarians who are getting certified in doing the equine spinal manipulation, as well as the small animal veterinarians. And so veterinarians already. And it's so much fun to teach them the yoga, because we can so make all these analogies, and you see all the light bulbs going off. And I asked them at the beginning, I said, what do you think that Dr. Pastor has me teaching you in this class? She's the lead on that. And they're like, some of them get it, and they're like, well, so that we don't break. I'm like, yes, it's so you don't break because you're moving big bodies around, but also it's because of empathy. As they start to feel in their own bodies what some of these changes that they're making feel, all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is big. And it feels big for the horses too. So even something as small as putting a tennis ball into a particular spot, the eyes kind of get big. Like, oh, that's intense. So it's that it is. It's the changes come from doing. The changes definitely come from actually starting, and then you can build the correct biomechanics, you can build the correct musculature, you can build the correct posture. But it has to be done on a consistent basis.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm like, continue to like sit up, Kinsey. put your shoulders back. Good posture. Like
responsibility of posture into your core.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I mean, if I'm gonna do it, got to do it right now. That I am somebody, and I know you probably hear this so much, and it is like, I know what a personal flaw it is, but I'm somebody, I can't take the breath and do the yoga. Like I can't, I I enjoy it once I'm there, but I don't know. It's really hard for me, and I'm sure I'm sure, especially in the equestrian world where everyone is just go 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 go. You experience this a lot. Um, there's not really a question there, but it's just like I know how valuable it is, and yet it's just really hard to get myself to do it.
So Kinsey, I completely understand. Like that activation energy is like, oh, oh, oh. I understand the resistance. And in coaching, like if I were to peg you, I'd be like, oh yeah, she's an activator. Yep. That means basically you're like, if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it now, like yesterday. So I get it. And it's a strength. It has a shadow. And it's just like all of our strengths have shadows. So but to get back to, to that point, yes, I will say this. I've been teaching yoga for over 25 years. And when I started practice to where the kind of practice I had to where I am now are vastly different. And I will still sometimes enjoy what I did at the beginning, but I know that my 21-year-old mind was not capable of staying still long enough to do the kind of yoga that I teach now. And I'm still able to meet that energy in my teaching, but it doesn't mix well with with some of the other, and I will say the older clients. So it is very specific to the kind of energy somebody brings, right? So I started off, as I've mentioned, with Ashtanga, which is a really physically challenging practice that it's kind of like, yeah, I got my workout in kind of thing. But its magic is still there because you actually have to use a particular kind of breath called Ujjayi breathing. It's called victorious breath. Just, by the way, amazing for calming a horse who is freaking out about something. It's really incredible when you start using that breath on a horse. It's like, oh, this is interesting. So I started off doing that practice, and that was a practice that I was in for several years before I started to transition into a different kind. Then when I went to India, I learned another style. I started incorporating that style. Then I discovered another teacher, started learning that style. And so over time, my teaching has changed. I will also say that over time, my clients have aged with me, which has been really interesting to watch. So I have the gamut. I have people who are in their 20s. I have somebody who is in her 80s, all doing like my class. But this comes back to coaching. Know thyself. Know who you are. Know what will actually work. And if you are somebody who is just, really wants to go and has a hard time stopping, then there might be a specific kind of practice that's going to really work well for you as an entryway into this world of paying attention.
Yeah. I need to take that advice, or I needed to go down that path, pull on that thread, because I do understand how valuable it is. You mentioned, and I'm not even going to try to know what the name of it was. You mentioned a type of breath, like
Yes.
breathing, a type of breath work. What does that mean? Is it like a rhythm? Like what are the different types of breath work? What does that mean?
Yeah. Great question. All right. So in yoga, we call any kind of controlling of the breath pranayama. And there are different ways of controlling the breath. So even just breathing into your belly is a type of pranayama, because now, we have an automatic breath, but now we become aware of the breath and we go and breathe into the belly. But what I mentioned was Ujjayi pranayama, which is often used with Ashtanga Yoga, but it's also used in other practices. And what it involves, it's a little funny. What you do is in yoga, we only breathe through the nose. And when you breathe in and out, you tighten the back of the throat so that it sounds like there is, some people call it a train going through. But essentially, I don't know that you'll be able to hear it if I do it, but it's a bit of a constriction in the back of the throat that slows the breath. And so it's I don't know if you heard that. I'm trying to exaggerate it a little bit. The way that I teach, it can be a little bit difficult for people to learn how to use it at first, like this. But if people aren't quite sure, you can try this if you like. Take a breath in through your nose, and then open your mouth and just go. So you kind of make that sound. And then when you close your mouth, you sort of do the same thing, except now the air is not going to come out through your mouth. It's going to come out through your nose. And it's going to feel strange at first. But as we hone it, we create the sound in the back of the throat. And what it does is it helps us be extremely alert and capable of using our body however we need to use our body, right? But it drops us into the here and the now with practice. And so if you are, let's say you're on an overstimulated horse, you're about to go cross country, and you're like, yep, I'm going to die. Yeah. We need to calm down. You start to take Ujjayi breaths. And what happens is, if you've been practicing this on the mat, you drop into this state of calm where all of a sudden that tension in the shoulders and the hips starts to melt away. You are completely aware of what's going on in this moment, and you respond to what is in front of you or under you, as the case may be, right now, as opposed to all these other thoughts that distract you. Because when we drop into the now, we know exactly what to do. We know that little, okay, buddy, soften. Here, I'm here with you. You connect. And all of a sudden, you're a team. And you're together. And you're talking to each other. And you are going forward over the course or whatever it may be. But you're not in this spinning of thoughts and oh my god, and I'm gonna do a rotational call, and I forgot that, you don't go down that vortex of fear or whatever it is that may be the issue at hand. And the horse feels it. When your energy changes, and this is why horses are used in therapy so much, and this is what the other part of coaching that comes in, you can see the threads that intersect, is you learn how to change your energy so that you can bring the kind of energy you want to the barn with you and to your horse in the moment. And by breathing, let's say you use this Ujjayi breath, it can become this catalyst for dropping into presence. And that is what's going to give you the answer you need in that moment.
Super cool. So how does yoga for equestrians differ to yoga not for equestrians? Is it different?
I use most of the same poses, but I will say that I relate what's going on in our bodies a lot to what's going on in the human body. It's kind of like what I said when I do at Chi University, because, for example, if you have tight back and weak abs, you're going to have back problems. If your horse has a tight back and weak abs, it's going to have back problems too. And so the same kinds of, I mean, yes, they are quadrupeds, and yes, we are bipeds, and there are going to be differences. But I often relate those things for the riders. There are also certain things that are going to be important for the riders. For example, this whole hunching thing. We work on ensuring, well, how do you actually have a good posture? It's important for everybody, but it can be very important for riders. And how do you engage the core so that the core has responsibility for posture, as opposed to kind of lifting yourself up by the shoulders? How do you disconnect using your abdominals from tightening your shoulders? That's a big problem for a lot of people. But in particular, if you, as a rider, let's say now you're riding dressage, and you need to engage your abdominals so that you can soften your back. There's something called reciprocal inhibition that goes on there. If you, it simply explained, like if I use my bicep, my tricep has to let go. That's reciprocal inhibition. Same as with your abdominals and your back. So if you engage your abdominals, your back has to soften, and that can follow the movement. But then explaining that to my students, like, why are we focusing on using the abdominals so that the back can soften? Helping them understand, for example, if I were to take my arms up and rotate my upper arms in, then bring them down, you can see that there's this hunching and rolling forward that happens. But now if I externally rotate my upper arm bones, all of a sudden I can lift. So riders who have their elbows out and tight in the trapezius, they're going to have a problem with not hunching and sitting up, because it's really difficult to sit up when you're doing this. But if you can drop your elbows, and this is one of the reasons that people usually say, bring the thumbs up when you're riding, because now you can externally rotate your upper arm bones, you can open your collarbones and lift. Another example, so I make these analogies and I make these connections for people. If you've ever ridden, and I speak more to dressage because that's what I mostly do, although I have jumped as well. If you've ever been told that your toes are too far out, turn your toes forward, usually it's because of a really tight piriformis, which is a deep-seated muscle in the hip, also attaches to the sacrum. And that muscle, when it tightens, it rotates out. Its role is to rotate out the legs. But we want to be widening the sits bones and releasing the piriformis to turn the toes forward. So it's not just about toes forward. It's actually about widening the sits bones. And how do you do that? How do you release the piriformis and widen the sits bones so you can really sit properly on the horse? So I make all of these connections for the riders. Now, the poses are still the same, the classic poses, but the connections are there. But also with riders, I'll often have to deal with things like injuries. Like, they're probably the only people who come in and fill out their release form and like medical history with, I have a rod in my back, and I'm like, okay, well, we'll have to modify for that. So there'll be compensations that they will have in their bodies, because now they've had an injury and they haven't necessarily addressed the biomechanics of that, and now there's a compensation going on, and now they've got some pain. So I help to bring them back to symmetry as much as possible. We are not symmetrical creatures, but that's what we're constantly working on, right? I mean, if your horse is always going better to the right, well, let's address that. So there might be a reason. So, and those are the kinds of things. It's usually hips and shoulders and sacroiliac issues because they've fallen off the horse one too many times or whatever. And I have a whole like practice for that. So that is the way that it differs. It's just, I happen to work with this population because I'm part of this population, and having experienced a lot of this stuff, it can also help me because I have the empathy to relate to, like, okay, I know what this feels like. Here's what we can do around that.
It's so helpful. And even, I mean, I think especially in any discipline, like in any sport or athlete, but in equestrians, I know equestrians, and being able to relate it to like, here is how this would be for your horse. It's like, oh, I get it now.
Yeah.
Like everyone understands their horse's anatomy better than they understand their own.
Yes.
So I think that's really cool. And are there some practices or exercises that you recommend that equestrians do on just a day-to-day basis to help improve their overall well-being?
Yeah. I hate to say it, but you gotta go in. You gotta go in. You gotta get quiet. I really do think that. I think the first step is truly to figure out where's your pain point, and I don't mean that necessarily as a physical thing, although it could be, right? It could be where's your discomfort. If you're going to be practicing yoga and you start in, your entryway is through the physical, is okay. So where's your discomfort? Is it that you have lower back issue? And then there would be particular practices that I would recommend for that. Blanket statement is only going to be figure yourself out. That's the best one that I can offer. And I don't mean figure yourself out, but start to get quiet so you can start to pinpoint the things that you probably already know need to be changed, and then commit to the change. And usually that's where my role comes in, is I am the accountable person who helps you with the committing to the change. Because as we know, and as you say, like, oh, I probably should be doing more of this, but well, then there's that accountability piece. Like, okay, so did you sit? Did you journal? Did you, whatever it is, and help the person figure out for themselves. Like, it might be, I read poetry and that helps me drop in, and then all of a sudden I get insights and I relax and whatever. Like, you need to know yourself. And that's the first step. And for some people, very recently I had an email from someone. I'm just this week, we're starting our new 12-week series online. And she was all excited. She said, oh, I'm going to start doing this. And I said, no, live stream. She missed the stream part. And she was like, oh, I thought it was going to be live again, because she's in this area. I know myself. I don't do online. I'm like, know yourself. That's the important thing. Like, that's fine. No problem. But know yourself. Because why would you throw money out and then not do it if you're not, if you're just know that you're not going to show up for the online class or whatever it is that you're doing. So, that's really the first step. And oftentimes that's where coaching comes in, because for people to even set aside that time or be courageous enough to walk in there into that sort of space within themselves, it takes someone maybe holding their hand.
Absolutely. So the kind of most important question of the hour, as we're here at the end of the hour, but how do people work with you? Like, how do you have openings for clients? Do you do virtual coaching? How does somebody get in contact with you, and if they want to find a way to work with you?
Oh, thank you for asking. I have very limited time open. So, but I am very happy. One of the things that I love doing, I really love helping people and helping horse people who are sincerely wanting to make changes in their lives. And what is open, and that is completely open, is my online yoga class. And we are just starting this week with the new class, so people can still join. It's completely affordable for anybody. It's like $10 a class. And I lead the classes twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6:30 Eastern. And they're recorded, and then people have recordings if they can't make a class. So those, but those are series, and you have to sign up for the series, the 12-week series. That is a very easy way to join, sort of dip your toe in, see what I'm all about. I do private sessions. I do those virtually, again, limited, and the same for coaching. I do very rarely do in-person sessions any longer here in the Ocala area. Again, because my schedule is quite full already. So as far as openings, I should say, for new clients. But occasionally I do have openings for new clients. So they can certainly get in touch with me. I'm on Instagram. That's an easy way if they want to message me. Actually, probably best is email. And I'm happy to share my email with the audience. We have a website, which is embodiedliving.org. So it's not .com, but .org. And that is very out of date because I have not had time to work on it ever since I had my son, who is now almost 6. And yes, the yoga kept me very young, apparently. Because surprise, there he was.
Oh my gosh.
So there you go. And for the record, I'm 50. So yes, we did have a son late in life. And yoga works. There you go.
That's incredible.
So the website does have, though, a pretty extensive blogs in there that address a lot of these things. And they're still valid. And they're older, but they're still valid, and you can go through. And they should have my email on there as well as how to reach me. And what else? So you can follow me on Insta. I don't post a whole lot. But really the live classes are the best, or getting in touch about coaching. And at the moment, we're also, my husband and I actually run a saddle import sales and fitting business. So that is the other thing besides this almost 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, that keeps me really busy.
Oh my gosh. You have a full plate. That's incredible. I love that. I love all that you're managing and you're doing it so well. It's really amazing and so admirable. Well, thank you so much, Sylvia, for taking the time and sharing about life coaching and sharing about yoga with us. I know that we all could benefit from leaning into both of those practices. So we really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us, and we hope to be able to work with you more in the future.
Thank you so much, Kizzy. I really appreciate it. And I thank you for the invitation to be here. And it was a pleasure conversing with you.
Yeah, likewise. And everybody who attended live, thank you so much for doing so. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. Bye, guys.